I see we have many scouts here. So the picture was, can you put back the picture or?
We've already been closed.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, you could see I was in uniform, and on the beret, in the middle was the sign of the ensign of our of the Cub Scouts in France, and you can see in the middle of it a little wolf. The wolf was because our Bible was the Jungle Book by Kipling, and you had Mother Wolf and Father Wolf, and we gave names, nicknames, and of all the names possible, I was given the one of Mowgli. Mowgli was the little boy who was adopted by the wolves. And I remember myself crying every time I read about the death of Mother Wolf. Okay. Now the 2 stars is just after a few years, after 1 or 2 years, you get 1 star. After another year, you get the 2nd star. This is how veteran you are.
Now that picture, though, that you were older, you were probably 9 or 10 in that photo.
I was 9
right?
or 10, something like that.
So that was not when you were in Strasbourg. What do you remember about your early life in Strasbourg?
Very little. Very little. What I know is more what my sister told me. I had a sister, passed away. She was 7 years older than me, and she told me a few things. She said that my mother, for instance, was a certified Hebrew teacher, but she never taught. She had to help my father to make a living, and she worked as a seamstress, and she worked very hard. And
And your father was a salesman?
My father was a traveling salesman, meaning he had clients. He represented manufacturers of leather goods like women's bags, handbags, etc. And he had clients which he visited regularly. So that was his profession. Now, during the war, I'm sorry,
No, that's
I understood only after the war that my father, we were all French citizens. My father had a French ID and with a red stamp Jew in it, Juif. And I understood only after the war when he boarded his train on Monday morning, there was absolutely no guarantee we will see him on Friday or Saturday. There was no guarantee. I understood only later after the war. But that was his job. He had a family to provide for, to support, and he did his job. At the end of the war, I guess because of that, my father was not very old. He was under 50, but he was worn out, a widower, and working, traveling during all the war, for the whole duration of the war, under the threat of being arrested.
Now, was your family very religious? Were they observant?
I was told that before the war, my mother kept a kosher house. After the war, my mother was not there, and maybe because of the war, we didn't keep any kosher. But my father insisted, and that I attend Jewish high school. At the time, I protested, but I am very grateful to him because in the Jewish high school, I learned Hebrew. And if I know well the Hebrew grammar, it comes from there.
Now, did your family speak, what language did they speak when you were younger?
My parents, I guess, used to speak Yiddish. Okay. And I know that I spoke Elsassisch, which is a kind of German patois in the area of Strasbourg. And when we moved to Paris, within 2 months, the Elsassisch was gone and the French came. Mm-hmm. I remember even that transition was kind of funny because I used to speak sometimes a word which was half German, half French. The word itself.
Now, so your family moved to Paris in 1938.
38,
now, this is before the war started.
Before the war.
Did they move because The
It wa-
threats that they had heard from
No,
Germany?
no, because simply it was more central
Okay.
to France, and my father was traveling. The normal path for for immigrants like my father was, first of all, for a few years, you represent a few firms, and you have your own clients, and you travel. After this, when you have a little bit more money, you open your own business. That was the normal path, and that was the path my father's elder brother went through. I mean, the path he followed. But the war caught up, and my father couldn't go in that path. At the end of the war, he had to kind of rebuild his clients, and he was worn out. Not old, but worn out. Later in his life, he had the joy of having two granddaughters from my sister, and he was also happy because my sister was a dentist, and she had a very successful career. She has a happy marriage, two daughters, and my father was very happy. To say that he was happy with me, I don't know, because this is a serious point. I decided I will not serve in the French military. That was the time of the war in Algeria. And I was a Zionist of all the times, but if I have to serve in a military, I prefer to serve in Israel. So I left France. I was a draft dodger in France. I'm not, I don't hide it. I'm not especially proud of it, but this is what I did. This is a fact. And I served 2 years in the IDF, and for 7 years I couldn't come back to France until there was an amnesty. Then I took advantage of the amnesty. I came back to France to visit my father.
So that's in your later life. When you first moved to Paris, though, you were only 5 or 6
I
years
was
old, correct?
4, 5, something like that.
What do you remember of your life in Paris? Did you start school?
I went to a school which I guess still exists. I know exactly where the school is, and I know exactly the apartment where we were. And the surprise was, I remembered the gate of the. We lived in a project, in a housing project. I remember the main door to the apartment building, and I remember that it was a big door. And when I came back after the war, suddenly the door shrank.
You got larger, I believe.
Yeah, that's it. I mean,
Yes. So, what was your life like? Did you have lots of friends? Were they Jewish? Did you?
In my system, I mean, in France, I went first to Jewish high school, and then 3 years in the French secular school, normal public school, not public and secular. And at school we were good friends, but once out of the school, no friendship. I mean, we didn't go to each other. We didn't go. I went once to a friend from school, a schoolmate. Let him call. I can more call him a schoolmate, because I forgot something, or I wanted to learn something about homework and something, and I had a feeling of uneasiness from him when I came to his house. But that was most of my friends were Jewish, from the Zionist movement.
So, your family lived in Paris, obviously, in 1939. This is when the war broke out, when Germany invaded Poland in the east. Mm-hmm. You were very young, obviously. You might not have heard much about the war.
I was born 33, says 34. Mm-hmm. The real war. You may know that World War II officially started in September 39, and the French called it the funny war. Why the funny war? Because there was no war.
The phony war? Or
the funny war, la drôle de guerre. Okay. Because until April 40, when the Germans suddenly invaded France and bypassed the French fortifications which were on the border. They attacked Belgium and then went to France through the north, and they beat the French in a matter of 3-4 weeks. Until then, it was called the Funny War, because there was no war.
And your family, they fled immediately.
We fled, I think it was in 40.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
I remember that we had to take a taxi from Paris to Orléans. Orléans is about 60 miles south of Paris, because the trains were not working. In Orléans, I think the bridge, there is a bridge there, a big bridge, was almost immediately destroyed. And so we took a taxi to Orléans, we crossed the bridge, and we took the train to the south. Must have been somewhere beginning of 1940.
Right time. Did you travel, was it just your family, or were there other families from the community that were traveled with you?
We traveled, I don't know if it was with another family, but my mother's brother's family, I mean, his wife and the son, my cousin, went to the same town. And also another sister, they went with 2 daughters to the same town, to Issoudun. But Issoudun is in the south, is in the center of France, more or less a geographical center of France. And I remember the 3 families together because we went to the same school, the 4 of us, my sister, me, and my cousin and my female cousin. And then some left for Tunisia, and the other 2 families, we went to that little town, Villefranche de Rouergue.
Now, why did you go to that town? It's a very small
Villefranche
town.
de Rouergue, for one good reason. My mother's uncle was there. My mother's uncle immigrated from, then it was Austria, to France, and he was 15, something like that. He made a kind of living in Paris. That's the whole story. And he, at some point, when World War I started, he found himself, when World War I started, he was himself an Austrian citizen, meaning enemy citizen, and he was assigned to live near that little town, where he met his wife, and after this he settled there.
So your family, it sounds like they were very fortunate. They had family that they could.
Yeah, we went to him. We called it Uncle Max, but Max Gottesman. But, we went there. He, at the beginning of World War II, he lost his son. His son was killed as a young officer in the French army, fighting the Germans. Wow. Yeah. And one very painful thing I saw after the war, I could go to the house freely. No, I just had to knock on the door, and I opened, I come in, and I found they had a little radio. They were listening to, I found his wife sobbing quietly. And the reason was that the radio, it was at the end of the war, the radio broadcasted the names of all the French POW who were released and were coming back home, and her son didn't come back. Yeah, he was killed beginning of the war.
So how did the rest of the town treat you? Were they hostile toward you?
No, they in that little town, everybody knew we were Jewish. There were some 20, 25 families. I don't remember exactly how many, but something like that. And the population was not hostile. The gendarmes, which is the equivalent of the troopers here, when they had once or twice, they warned us, and they warned the men that they had to go into hiding for a couple of days, and because they had orders to arrest them. We got a warning. Now, during the summer, we went to the countryside, to a little hamlet in the countryside. To this day, I don't know if it was for a vacation or if it was to hiding, or if it was a mixture of both. I don't know. One thing I remember, in September 43, that was one of your further questions. In September, there was a rebellion inside the German army, the German occupation troops. A rebellion by Croatian soldiers against their officers. That rebellion was crushed by other German troops with utter brutality. That's another detail. And they put the curfew on the town. They put posters explaining what the curfew was. And the last line said, don't be influenced by the Brits and the Jews. And we saw the Jews who say, maybe we should go into hiding for a couple of days. So we succeeded somehow to bypass the curfew, and we went away for a couple of days. The problem was to take my father out of the train before he comes back to the town. We knew exactly his itinerary, we knew exactly which train he was in. My sister and me, we went to the station, to the nearest station to where we were hiding, and the train came, stopped to the 2 minutes. In 2 minutes there is no time to go through the train, and the train started to pull up, and here my father shows up at the window. So we ran, my sister and me, we ran after the train. These were steam trains. They start very, very slowly. And we ran after the train. We told him, Dad, Papa, come back at the next station. And so he came.
And so this
I guess that when we left, somebody left him a note that we have to go. But so we picked him up.
So this is in 1943.
43.
So you were 10 years old
Yes.
at this point. By that point, the Germans had occupied the rest of France for close to a year. Do you remember feeling in danger before the poster that you saw?
No, I don't know. But one thing, my parents didn't tell me everything. That's obvious. That's obvious. One day I came back, in 42, something like that, we started to hear rumors from what's happening to the Jews in Eastern Europe. Another thing was we got postcards from my grandparents. And the second postcard said, we are leaving, we don't know where we are going. Today
They're
we know
still
exactly.
in Poland, right? Your grandparents
That
were
was
still
in Poland. And today we know exactly what they were. They were marched to a nearby forest, and they were told to undress, and they were gunned down in a trench. Today we know, we know that almost immediately after the war, we knew it by survivors. So we started to hear rumors, and one day I came back home, I said to my parents, today I spoke with my friend at school, the poor Jews, what's happening to them in Eastern Europe, and my aunt then said, don't talk about that. That's it. So I didn't talk about that later. But other things, I remember that we went into hiding for a few nights to the science teacher. For me it was an adventure. And to this day, I don't know exactly, I didn't have the curiosity to ask why. I remember that I went to school from his house. We were there 2-3 days. I remember all the funny details, but...
So just to step back for a moment, your mother had passed away in May of 1941, and so your aunt came to take care
She
of
came, my aunt was her youngest sister. She came to take care of her sister. And after this, she took care of us. She stayed with us. One of the problems with my tante was, and to this day I don't know how she managed, she was not French. She was a Polish citizen. Although she was a dentist and she graduated from a French university from Strasbourg, she had no right to work. and she was a Pole. How she survived all that, I don't know. Maybe also she didn't want to talk about it.
Well, that underscores how important it was that you had French citizenship.
Sure.
Were there other Jews in the town
There
who
were.
did not have
Yes,
citizenship?
across the street from us, there was a Jewish family, the Stocky family. And they had 3 boys, 3 children. 2 were in my class at school. And one day they vanished. And they were relocated in Eastern Europe. And 2 years ago, I went to Paris to the Holocaust Memorial in Paris. I found their names on the wall among the people who were deported. Then I went to the archives, and they didn't survive. That's what I know.
So you and your sister and your aunt went into hiding
Mhm.
in 1943.
Yeah.
How long were you in hiding?
Oh, that time, maybe 10 days.
Okay.
Not very long.
Okay.
Not
And you were
very-
in a forest.
Excuse me?
You were in a
In a
forest?
forest. I had my mother's first cousin was, he was a character. Azril. Azril was living in the woods, but literally in the woods. His bed was marked by stones, and he had leaves there on which he used to sleep. We went to him for, I guess, a week. Then we came back.
So if you had not, obviously I'm asking a what-if question, but had you not gone into hiding, do you know what might have happened to you?
We don't know. I mean, that was when they had these posters and wrote on it that don't be influenced by the Brits and the Jews. So we went to Azril for maybe 10 days, something like that.
So then you came back
came
home,
back.
and your father stayed with you, correct? He did
Yes,
not.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Then my father came, and he still was traveling. I mean,
So he did not. He did not stop working the whole time.
he
correct?
did not, as far as I know, he did not stop working. Which might explain that after the war he was worn out.
So, 1944. Obviously, history students will know this. 1944, the Americans and British forces land on Normandy. Were you aware? So at this point, you were 11.
The
12 years
news
old.
swept over France by word of mouth. I don't think it took 24 hours until it reached us. And we were some good 400 miles away. Okay? A good 400 miles away. And it swept, maybe it didn't take 24 hours.
When did the war end for you? When did you?
I'm
feel-
sorry. On the other hand, there was SS. The SS were in the German army. There were the elite divisions. An armored SS division was for rest and recuperation in the south of France. And when the Allies came, they were rushed to the north. And part of them went or through our town or nearby our town. And I know that they did some, when they saw in one case at least that I know of, they saw a nice little villa and they made a target drill, target exercise. They blew up the villa from the tank.
Did you have any interactions with any of the German soldiers, either then or at any other time?
No, at the very beginning, they occupied all France, and there was a regular soldier from the Wehrmacht. Field. And I remember just at one instance, a soldier asked for cigarettes, and I answered him in some broken German, etc., that to go to the nearest store here. I was maybe 8, something like that.
So when did the war end for you? When did you have a sense that it was over?
That's a good question. I mean, look, Paris was liberated in August, and Toulouse was liberated in August also, and that was more or less the end of the war. I don't know if it was exactly the end of the war for it. There is no precise, more a feeling than a precise date. We heard that Paris was liberated. We heard about the invasion, and we saw the German rushing to the front.
Did you? I know your family returned to Paris. Was that
Yes.
immediate, or did they?
I think in 45. And then I went to, my father first rented a room to start to rebuild his clientele, and and I went to boarding school, Hebrew to boarding school, which opened I think in 46.
Okay.
And I stayed there for 3 years.
So you mentioned that you had a cousin who had been killed at the very beginning of the war. Did you have any other relatives in France who had been?
I lost in France 2 relatives. One was killed at the liberation of Toulouse, and to this very day there is a plaque there. Here fell Commandant Philippe, Major Philippe, that was his war name, Zev Gottesman, and they give the date exactly. Another one was my cousin Lucien Schiffman. Lucien Schiffman was a doctor, an MD, and he was in the underground, and he had a little clinic for wounded people who were under wounded resistance. He was taken prisoner, and he said, as a doctor, I could not leave my patients, and the Nazis wouldn't have it, and they executed him in Périgueux.
You mentioned the story of your grandparents and their fate.
Yes.
Were there other relatives in Poland? How did you learn about what happened to your distant?
We learned by one who lost his family, and he himself that day was in another town. So he survived. He wrote a whole book about his memories from war. He gave some. He wrote in Hebrew. I translated it into English and French. French for the family, English for the museum. And I gave two. I have a few copies here. How we survived, but we know that from him. Now, Chaim lived a very long life after. He passed, he was 91 something, 92.
How did you get into study agriculture? How did you decide?
Well, I was a good Zionist, and I thought that agriculture was a good profession to have in Israel. Another thing, I went to a youth movement which educated you to go to Israel, not only to go to Israel, but to join a kibbutz. Kibbutz were the collective farms. Today the kibbutz almost don't exist anymore. They are more kind of cooperative villages, but not collective villages.
So you moved to
I moved to Israel.
To Israel.
The first thing I did was to enlist the IDF. I served 2 years in the IDF, in the artillery corps, and then 15 years in the reserve.
And then did you immediately then start working for the United Nations, or did you work in Israel?
No, I'm sorry. I worked at the Ministry of Agriculture. First, in a department which taught. It was a kind of school which taught students from Africa to come to Israel and to learn about agriculture, about other subjects, etc. And then I said, I'm an agronomist, I want to see agriculture. I left that post and I went into the Agricultural Advisory Service. I worked there from maybe 10 years, something like that. And
So
then I was the Ministry of Agriculture said, you know, Alex, They are looking for agronomist, French-speaking, good experience in agricultural extension. That was in Haiti.
Ah, okay.
So then I went to Haiti and I spent a year and a half in Haiti. And from Haiti I started wandering in other countries. I was embroiled with I was caught in the gears of the United Nations. And I went to Nepal 3 years. I went to Rwanda before the genocide, and 1 year in Jamaica.
And then how you moved to the United States in 1989.
89, yes. This is, I got a second job in Haiti, and then my wife said, you go to Haiti, I go to the United States for a doctorate degree. And she wound up in the George Washington University here. And 1 year later, I used to shuttle. Sometime when I had a long weekend, I could come from Haiti and go back. And after a year, I came to the United States. And the date is very easy to remember. The next day, George Herbert Bush was inaugurated. Bush the father. Yeah.
So it looks like we will have time for some audience questions, and you will have the chance to give the final word after the question, after the audience questions. But I know that for many people here, this is their first time at the museum, perhaps their first time in Washington. Is there anything in particular about the museum that you would like to point out to them or make them aware of during their visit?
Yeah. When you visit a museum, in fact, the building is talking to us. And try to listen and to see what the building is telling. I'll give you a few examples. When you are out of the building, you cannot see inside. This is secrecy. You don't know what's happening in. When you are in the little alley where you expect windows, you have plates of steel. When you are inside, same thing. You cannot look outside. You have 3 windows. Look well, you have 3 windows and it's black behind. This is the isolation. When you are in the museum, you don't see, it's not like a regular museum where you have signs and arrows, what to see, what programs today, etc. You have to look for that. And this is to keep you confused. You don't know. That's exactly like the people who were deported. They are confused. They were confused. In the museum, you walk from, if you look from the entrance from the 14th Street, you have a white wall. In front of it, you have a symbolic war scene. It's a kind of building which was destroyed. You just have a carcass. Okay. On the other hand of the hall, you have a black wall. This is death. And in the middle, you have a slanted wall. You will see it here when you come out. A wall which is in diagonal. You go straight, it's the black wall, death, but you don't know it. In the left, you go somewhere, you don't know where, but you live, and you don't know it. Now, the wall is the selection at the entrance of the camp. Okay? And I went to Auschwitz last year, and you see exactly the platform where was the selection, where people came by train, and you had an officer with a little table like this, and he didn't talk, he just said, one was slave labor, and one was gas chamber. But I'll talk about this a bit later.
And I hope that everyone has the opportunity to visit the museum's permanent exhibition. Be sure to have your ticket stamped so that you can make sure that you get in to see that. But we also have a number of special exhibits, and you and I talked briefly about one in particular that is meaningful for you.
There is one, if you go in the lower level, there are 4 exhibitions. One is about the genocide in Cambodia. And Cambodia is very dear to my heart because I went to Cambodia with the Israeli assistance program. And I should have stayed there 2 years in an agricultural project. I stayed only 4 months because these were the years where the war in Vietnam started to spill over in Cambodia. And at night you could see the flares of the bombing in the east. So the family couldn't come, and I went back to Israel. But Cambodia was a very, very nice place. If you have, I'm not a travel agent, but if you can go there, there are the ruins of Angkor Wat, and this is worth the trip. The whole trip is worth. This is worth the trip. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Are you up for some questions from the audience?
Yeah,
Sure.
If you have some questions.
What we'll do is we have two, my colleagues have microphones on either side. If you could raise your hand, we'll call on you. Please wait for the microphone to read the questions. I'll repeat the question just to make sure that everybody hears it, and then we'll give Alex a chance to respond. If there are questions you don't have a chance to ask or that are more in depth, Alex will be around afterwards. You can come up just to
Sure.
say hello and have a conversation there. So, are there any questions from the audience? Yes. Yes.
Microphone here. Oh, here.
Were you scared?
Were you scared?
Oh, during the war? I don't remember being scared. I had no reason to be scared. I went to school every day. I know for a fact that I did not miss one day of school. This I asked, that the only question I asked after the war. And I did not miss a day. I was not scared. When I went to sleep at my science teacher, it was more an adventure. And they knew exactly how to occupy us. Just an anecdote. They had books of political cartoons. And the cartoons showed two populations. One, they called them the Botellas. The Botellas from the word the boots. And the boots were the Italians, because Italy has the shape of a boot. So were the Botellas and the Capellos. The Capellos were the helmets. Germany looked a little bit like a helmet. I remember that booklet. I remember also they had for breakfast good jam. As you can see, I'm a good eater, so. No, I was not, I don't think I was scared. And for me to go to the countryside during the summer, I don't know if it, as I told you before, I don't know if it was a vacation or hiding or a mixture of both. I don't know. I love to go there. I love to tend to the sheep. I used to take the sheep for grazing, and also the ducks. Once I lost the ducks, and I want to see something else, and they were in the field. They just ate what fell after the, after the harvest. You have always grain, which fall on the soil and on the earth, and the ducks knew the way back, so they started to walk back. And I look, where are the ducks? They were going back home.
I think we have a question back.
Morning, Alex. How you doing? I want to thank you first off for sharing your story with all of us.
Oh, thanks.
It's
You're welcome.
something historical that we all need to, listen to and experience. I want to ask you, working with the UN and traveling around the world, I'm sure that you met some people, or if not, that might not believe that none of this ever happened. Some of those people might be in this country as we speak. So, what would you say to somebody who?
You mean deniers?
Yes. What would you say to somebody who might say that they don't believe that none of this happened?
So the question is about Holocaust denial, and did you encounter any denials, or how would you respond to a denial?
I could respond because I never met people who denied. And another thing was that was not a subject of conversation. It came out a few times, maybe, I don't remember, about that. But no, I don't remember having met deniers.
How would you?
I remember having met deniers of the dangers facing the state of Israel when Israel got independence. This I remember, and especially, I shouldn't be political here, but people from the left especially said, oh, leave me alone with that old security of Israel. Well, the war of independence in Israel was, to this day, the hardest and the bloodiest war in Israel. The hardest and the bloodiest and the longest. Over a population of 600,000, there 6,000 casualties. I never calculated how it would be on the scale of the United States, but and for this I met not exactly deniers, but people who were belittling that. Yes. Oh, have many.
Were you happy with the decisions you made?
Excuse me, with what decision, to go to Israel?
Like all your decisions.
So it sounds, hearing from your story, that makes me
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Thank you for the question. It makes me think. You were very young, so
Yes.
a lot of the decisions that were being made were made above you.
Maybe,
But
yeah.
there are certain points at which, had
The
you not,
decision
had
to
your
go
family
to-
not left Strasbourg, had they not left
Yeah,
Paris, had they not gone into hiding.
The decision to go to Israel, I never regretted it. Never, although it cut me from my home country for a good few years, I never regretted it. I was perfectly integrated in the Israeli society, and one of the best ways to be integrated is to serve in the military. You meet people people from the Jewish people. You met members of the Jewish people from many countries which I didn't meet before. One example. On Saturday morning, I was in the barracks, and I woke up the first Saturday, and I heard there was some soldiers playing backgammon, if you know what the game is, but it's especially an Oriental game, and screaming at each other in Arabic, and playing with a boombox, full volume, music from the Arab world. And I woke up, I thought, I am in Baghdad. I'm not in Israel. These were the Iraqi soldiers. I never met them before. Another thing were the Yemenites. Yemenites, they were darker than we were. They were skinnier than we were, and more hardworking than we were. We were corner cutters, you know. For instance, I was in artillery. In artillery, one of the hard things was to dig a position for your gun. Well, we dug. We got instruction to dig 1 meter deep, or 1 meter, and so something like this. And digging, it's hard work. They give you only plow. They give you it's called picks, and they give you shovels, and you have to work, and you work all night because everything is done at night, and you don't stop working until the gun is in its position and fully camouflaged. Well, the ones who finished the job the first and the deepest were always the Yemenites. Always. Each gun commander could more or less take his crew, And when you had a Yemenite who was in charge of a gun, he selected Yemenites to work with him. They were always the first finished and the deepest. We always try to cut corners here and there. Yes?
Any questions? Sonia?
Mhm.
Yes.
Did your father say that he was scared?
Excuse me?
Did your father say he was scared? So I wondered, you may have been too young to be scared, but your father or your sister who was older than you, did you recall them feeling scared?
I don't know. As a matter of fact, I don't know. My sister went to school every day. She was 7 years older than me. She went regularly to school. If my father was scared, he didn't tell us, as far as I remember. And my sister, I don't think she was scared. She knew better the reason why we went to the science teacher or why we went into hiding for a couple of days. But I don't think so.
It must have been an incredibly stressful time, though. You said your father was just exhausted after.
At the end of the war, he was exhausted and worn out. Worn out. Yes. Wow. Okay.
The microphone is, you can hand out.
Microphone.
You said a German soldier asked you for cigarettes. Did you have any other encounters with other German soldiers, and were they friendly or not?
I don't remember. I don't think so. Yeah, the only thing I remember when there was that rebellion from the Croatian soldiers, I was at a good friend of my aunt, at Miss Collini, and Maria Teresa Collini. She was an Italian refugee. She was a communist, and she was, an endangered species under the Nazis. And I was at her home, I don't remember why, and I was walking home and I heard shootings. And when I went to a nice little place which was in the center of that town, I saw dead soldiers under blankets. I mean, they were shot and they were under blankets. And I think my tante was scared out of her mind until I came home. But I don't know, I don't remember been scared.
I think we have time maybe for two more questions.
That's up to you. I mean, yes.
Alex, thank you for your story. You lived through one of the most significant parts of our world history. You have a captured audience of young people. What would you say to them out of your life lessons that may help them today with our history that's being written as we talk?
Oh, what would I say?
So what would be your lesson for the young people in the audience?
First of all, learning it and not forget it, and fight against deniers. Because the more we progress over the years, the less direct witness you will have, and the more deniers you might have. If today you listen to Iran is a denier. They are deniers. They don't say there was such thing as a Holocaust. And that's one thing. You have to learn it, and you have also to take a vow, never again. So you see this in the museum here and there. Never again. And unfortunately, it happens. It happens in Cambodia. It happens in Darfur and some other places. I don't have it. Oh, it happened in Syria, right now. Right now in Syria. There shouldn't be deniers. By the way, if you go in the museum here, if you go to the second floor, to the right, in the first hall, there are a few photographs from what's happening in Syria. But what happened 6 months ago because there is a defector from an official, a photographer from the government who defected, and he brought memory sticks to the museum. And you will see a few of these photographs there. Today it's worse. It's worse what's happening. Okay.
I mentioned about the museum as a challenge, an experience.
Yeah.
You'll see posters that as you leave, that challenge you to think about what you saw. And we encourage you to be witnesses by visiting the museum today, by hearing Alex's story, by seeing the exhibits. You are witnesses to the truth about the Holocaust and the related subjects.
And talk to your friends about it. Sometimes, you know, I am a very sensitive soul when I work at the information desk. And even if it is sold out, I always find a little reason to give them tickets. And I always say, I confess it to you, I always say, don't ask questions, okay, about the tickets. But then I said, you know, when you go out, you talk about your friends to what you saw here. Okay? Yes.
Why or whenever you during the Holocaust, did you and your family have to wear like stickers saying that y'all were Jews or a name tag saying that y'all were Jews? Or no?
It's an excellent question. So in many places, Jews were forced to wear yellow stars, as you'll see in the exhibit.
But we never had to. My family never had to, and the Jews in that town never had to. That's clear. The town, and as I said, the little town, they knew we were Jewish. These 20 and some families knew we were Jewish, and they were not hostile. But, once or twice somebody called him, oh, le petit juif, the little Jew boy. But that was it. I mean.
So we want to make sure that you all stick around to hear Alex's final word. It's a tradition with first-person programs that we give the survivors the chance to have the final word. But I did want to say if anyone had questions that they did not get to ask, or if they want follow-up questions,
you can
or just to
ask
meet
after,
Alex and say hello, and take a
Sure.
photograph. He'll be around for a few minutes afterwards.
Yeah.
I wanted personally to thank you all for coming today, and I hope you have a challenging and meaningful visit to the museum. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex for the final word.
Okay. Yeah, last summer I went to Auschwitz. I wanted to see it. So you fly to Krakow. Krakow is a very nice town. In Krakow you have the feeling, you still feel the influence of somebody who was called Karol Wojtyla. You may not know who is Karol Wojtyla. Karol Wojtyla became Pope John Paul II. He was the Archbishop of Krakow, and you feel him. You feel still the influence. Then you take unfortunately, I would say, Auschwitz and the Birkenau, which are just nearby, are treated like a tourist attraction. So you have you take guided tours. They take you from your hotel. You go to Auschwitz, and you see Auschwitz. You see the gate with the famous inscription, Arbarit macht frei, meaning it's a deceiving inscription, which means that work makes you free. When you go in, this is a two-story building. You see, you can take pictures anywhere but one room. In that room, you have a heap of human hair. And on the side, there is a blanket made of human hair. This, you cannot take pictures of it. It's forbidden, out of respect for that. In Auschwitz, you see the gas chamber, you see the crematoria, and you know that in Auschwitz and Birkenau there were 14 crematoria, and with flares in the night, and it was never bombarded. And you ask yourself, why? How come? And the Allies knew. And when you ask the pilots said, we never got the order to do it. So that's one thing. Now, the last thing is, when you visit Birkenau, in Birkenau, the Nazis tried to hide it, and they blew up the gas chamber, and they blew up the crematoria. But you see still the ruins of it. And you go there, you see also the railroad coming in. You see where the SS used to sit with the table and directed people to death or gas chamber or slave work, etc. And one question you ask, the prayer for the deceased, the Hebrew prayer in the Jews for the deceased, starts with the words El Maleh Rachamim, meaning God full of mercy. And you ask yourself, God full of mercy, where were you? Where were you? Now, I will end on a more positive side. Last year I went to a small village in France. And that village is, I recommend it if you have, I can give you the name after, it's called Vézelay. That village is a little jewel in France, but that's not the point. In that village you have a little monastery on the right. And on the right, and there is a plaque outside. And the plaque says, in this site, Sister Elodie and another sister, I forgot the name, and other sisters hid and saved Jewish Jews. We know that they are talking about 15 girls who were hidden there and escaped. They saved them. And that site was designated as righteous among the nations by the state of Israel. This is what the plaque says. I should have brought the plaque, but I couldn't. My printer doesn't work at home, so I couldn't do it. Anyway, so now if somebody wants questions after, I'm open to.
Well, thank you all again for joining us, and join me in thanking.